Welcome. I am delighted to kick off what promises to be a very vibrant and important discussion looking at the problem of homelessness in the Kalamazoo community. And I look forward to not only the presentation, but also to a dialogue between all of the groups that are involved and interested in working very hard on the issue. And then we will have a discussion with the audience.
So I'm going to share a broad perspective around housing, especially housing within Kalamazoo County. So when we look at housing works, we tend to think about it on these continuums. And the reason we got all these arrows going back and forth is because life is messy and people need to move up and down this housing continuum based on their life situation. So we want to see a healthy housing ecosystem that allows options for people to move up and down based on our needs. So the first thing we looked at was the folks that are unhoused. And what you see is that the rate is pretty stable for folks that are unsheltered. But what you see is in the folks that are in the emergency housing options, that has been increasing over the last couple of years. And then likewise, we see in transitional housing, that number is increasing pretty steadily over the last couple of years as well. So while the number of people who are completely unsheltered is stable, we've increased our capacity in some of the other options for folks, which has been a tremendous response from our community to meet the needs of the increasing number of folks that we consider unhoused. We also look at how much folks are paying for their housing expenses, and we see that there's about 13,000 households within Kalamazoo County that are paying more than 50% of their income towards their housing expenses, whether that's rent or home ownership. That's a tremendous number of folks that are one financial crisis away from potentially losing that housing, and again, tumbling down this housing continuum into other housing situations. How do you get to this situation? And one of the primary reasons is that housing costs have increased at a higher rate than wages have. Part of that is we're not building enough. When we wrote the Kalamazoo County Housing Plan back in 2022, we estimated that we needed 7,750 units just to soak up the pent-up demand that existed in the county. We recently adjusted that number based on the Blue Oval battery plant going in Marshall. We saw that there's probably going to be some increased housing demand in Kalamazoo County due to that. So we adjusted that number to about 8,000 units by 2030. And so we've been actually canvassing all of our local units of government to figure out how many units we've built since we created the plan back in 2022. And that number is about 2,415. We haven't gotten numbers back from Ashtamo or the Village of Climax, so that number is probably going to increase some. But it's still below what our projected number is at this point, which would be about 3,000 units. If you take the U.S. median household income, which is about $80,000, those folks could afford a house around $250,000. And we don't build those. We used to build a lot of those prior to the Great Recession. We just don't build those.
Housing and unhoused folks, it's not a monolithic situation. There's not just one thing that will solve it all. You have folks who may be working hard and for some reason miss a month or two rent who just need help to stay there. And then you have folks at another end who might be struggling with serious mental illness, certainly perhaps struggling with substance use disorder, may not have any income, may have lived outside for a long time. That's a wholly different kind of response. If we are not serious people and stop kind of chasing the next, what seems like wonderful idea, and just go back to the basics of what it takes just to create housing for the populations that is appropriate to the need of the population, well, we're not going to address it.
The first question I want to ask is a little bit of a data question. I just want to make sure that you folks agree with the sort of presumption that we made in the slides, which is that the number of people experiencing homelessness is increasing, but also our capacity to house these folks has also been increasing.
We certainly are in a situation of uncertainty now, but one thing we can be certain about, for example, is when it comes to our national response to this, we're talking about the Department of HUD, and some of the grants that we applied for last fall during application time, which now we're not going to get, and our changing or diminishing commitment at that level, which is critical to addressing this, I think that we're going to see an increase in people dealing with situation of not being housed.
But what do you see as sort of the issues that are related to why people are homeless in terms of Kalamazoo City and County?
There is no one reason that people are experiencing homelessness. But I think as we're thinking about the solutions, we need to look at all of the people, all of the reasons, right? The person who's lost a spouse doesn't need financial training. They don't need financial classes. That wasn't their reason for being unhoused. And so when you're looking at solutions, we need to, I believe in having a targeted universalistic approach to it, right? The universal idea is to end homelessness, but our targets are different. And as long as we have solutions that address the entire need, we should be moving together as a whole out of this situation, or at least in a better space.
Yeah, what contributes to homelessness, and then what are some of the barriers? Obviously, the most obvious one is the lack of affordable housing, discrimination based on income source, stringent rental criteria, insufficient supportive services, and eviction histories. And so those are barriers for folks coming out of homelessness and getting into affordable housing. But these are some of the things that do contribute to homelessness, which we see consistently.
What are some of the things that we're doing to address the folks that are in Bronson Park, that are on the street? And how does that system work? And what are some of the gaps?
We have some parallel systems that run at Kalamazoo. We have a faith-based system, we have our COC system, we have some of the things that happen. And for us, within the continuum of care, our coordinated entry system is a system where people can access resources or be matched to resources that are available or become available in the future. And there's a prioritization system for that. So people who are chronically homeless, people that are disabled, people that are veterans can be prioritized and matched. As resources begin to dwindle, and if we continue to see the impacts of federal funding, you're going to see how do we redefine those priorities and that prioritization within that system. We need everything from a tiny home and a mobile home to luxury apartments right now, luxury homes, to meet the need. The individuals that we're seeing living outdoors, I think that they are categorized many times as one group. And within that, there are such varying needs. And I think we also have to acknowledge that there are certainly people that will not come inside for whatever reason. They don't want to be inside structured programs. And sometimes we don't want to say that, I think, in our out loud voices. But also within there are real needs and real people that are just acutely find themselves in those situations, and long-term people with those mental health and substance abuse needs.
In terms of the problems that you're describing, the variety of problems, is that it's not housing first. It's addressing the problems that the folks that we see on the streets are having, such as drug problems, alcohol problems, etc., before we can even think about the housing solution. Folks that won't come inside, for example. So it's the philosophy of housing first, I think, is important for a lot of the continuum. But I think what you're talking about is sort of a need that we have to address other problems that these folks are having first before we think about housing.
Housing first is not the absence of support services. And I think sometimes when we talk about housing first, we just hear the idea of people deserve housing and should receive housing, and that's it. Housing first is the idea that we are wrapped around them. People deserve to be housed no matter what their situation is. That housing might look different. People who have substance use disorder and mental health issues, studies show they're rehoused and rehoused and rehoused. And as they're rehoused, there's longevity in the amount of time that they remain housed.
Let's talk about the federal landscape. How dependent are we on federal funds? What is our risk factor right now that if federal funds were to decline significantly, are we going to be in big trouble in terms of because of the dependence we have on federal funds?
With this new administration, we have all been in a very chaotic state since January. There was an executive order, freezing all of the funds. And so even though the memorandum was rescinded, those executive orders around DEI, around immigration, around gender, there are a lot that goes into that are absolutely impacting the work that we have right now. So as you all may know, there was a continuing resolution passed with respects to the budget. That does not allow for additional resources to flow into our communities What we do know from our state and federal partners is that the state does not have the budget to support the deficit that we would be in if the federal government took back their funding or if they even decreased it somewhat.
I would say that the county housing millage generates about $9 million a year. That's not federal funding, so we will continue to invest in our project. And the mission is also funded through philanthropy and private donors. And I don't think they take any federal funds either. There's $4.5 million that comes generously every single year to support our largest provider, the mission. And so I think Ministry with Community is largely supported through local philanthropy too. But the Continuum is absolutely supported by federal dollars. And so I don't think there's enough money in philanthropy to backfill all the cuts that could be coming or that could be on the horizon.
You have to start, I believe, with the end in mind. Why are you trying to help them? Are you trying to find them places because there's a need? Or are you just trying to find places to get them out of downtown? Because you approach those two differently. And I think we need to start with the end in mind that we need to help these.
A special thank you for everyone here. I know there are a lot of folks who care deeply about this issue. Pastor Michael, delighted to meet you. But we have a lot of people that are working on these issues, and I appreciate everyone coming this morning and participating. It was great. Thank you very much.